Yeah, this involves Bernie Sanders. And for a couple of weeks now, Cenk, Bernie Sanders' staff has not been discouraging reporters to speculate about his chances or the possibility of him running in 2024. The Sanders staffers, like the senator himself, have always said, we expect President Biden to run for re-election, and Senator Sanders is going to support him. However, over the weekend, there were a flurry of headlines, and there seems to be this whisper campaign that is growing into a yell among Democratic donors, Democratic activists who are fearful that Joe Biden is not the person to take the fight to Republicans in 2024. They're worried about his physical fragility. They're frightened by the drop in poll numbers that continues. As a result, Bernie Sanders staffers have been told to essentially have a contingency plan. And this has been approved by apparently Senator Sanders to have preliminary discussions about what a Sanders 2024 presidential campaign would look like in the primaries and in the general election. And again, these are the preliminary early sorts of talks that you have to have if you are in fact serious about running a presidential campaign, because these take a couple of years to put together. However, the fact that Bernie Sanders appears to have told his staff, go ahead and have these discussions, let's go ahead and have a plan in place. And this comes right after Fez Shakir, who was the campaign manager, said recently in an op-ed in the New Republic that he believes Bernie Sanders is the strongest politician the Democrats can put forward. So they're adding a little more meat to the bone in terms of having this plan, these early talks begin if, and it's a big if Joe Biden, for whatever reason, decides not to seek re-election.
So this is really big news, and this is new right now. So very interesting that you got these sources, David. And it's interesting on two fronts, because one, earlier, as you mentioned briefly, we covered on the Young Turks that Bernie said that he would not run if Biden runs again. But if Bernie's getting ready, that means a couple of things. If Biden doesn't run, it looks like it's increasingly more likely that Bernie Sanders will run. So that's interesting. But number two, it seems like maybe he doesn't quite believe him that Joe Biden's going to run. Like Biden says he's going to run, and Bernie says he believes him, but it appears they're not sure.
Well, a couple of things. I mean, there's been louder voices among Democratic donors who are making suggestions to the Democratic governor of North Carolina and to Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren and to Cory Booker and certainly to Gavin Newsom, the Democratic governor of California. We do not have faith in Joe Biden. We want you to prepare a presidential bid on the chance that Joe Biden decides himself not to run. Bernie Sanders is hearing all of this as well. And I think it might be a little bit of envy that maybe Bernie Sanders wasn't part of the conversation. So it progressed from his aide saying, no, wait a second, don't forget about Bernie Sanders, to now actually Sanders encouraging his staff to start to put the pieces together. And again, Fez Shakir, despite what Bernie Sanders said to the Young Turks a while back, Fez said just a couple of weeks ago not to discount the possibility that nobody is saying Bernie Sanders now will not run. And now we have a little more sort of leaning towards, well, Bernie Sanders would like to run and feels that he's in good physical fitness, that his mind is agile. And one of the ways they're underscoring that, Cenk, you saw a couple of weeks ago, and we're going to do a video on Rebel HQ on this. It's going to come out tomorrow. They had Bernie Sanders throw out a first pitch at a minor league baseball game. He looked physically fit and strong for somebody who's 80 years old. Bernie Sanders is also engaged now in some very high-profile public debates moderated by Fox News against Lindsey Graham. This is not by accident. The Sanders team says this is to try to show that Bernie Sanders is as mentally competent and feisty as ever, that he has not lost a step, and part of the effort for Bernie Sanders to start raising his profile at the same time that the prospects seem to be going up, perhaps for Joe Biden not to seek re-election.
That's really interesting. But can he really do man, woman, camera, person TV? Can he? I mean, is he up to that challenge?
It's a high bar.
Yeah.
Look, you know what? He clearly likes to run. Clearly, Bernie Sanders, I think, a couple of things, and I had the opportunity to cover his campaign a little more sort of directly in 2016 than in 2020. But Bernie Sanders likes the politicking. He likes going out there and explaining Medicare for all and why there should be the minimum wage should be raised and why that Wall Street needs to be raided. He really likes talking to people who don't necessarily believe him. He likes the politicking. He made an appearance on NBC's Meet the Press a couple of weeks ago that I was told was also part of this effort to raise his profile. So all of this at least suggests Bernie Sanders, I mean, look, we'll have to decide, is Bernie Sanders the right leader for the progressive movement? Well, it seems like Bernie Sanders wants that to be decided perhaps in Democratic presidential primaries.
Yeah, I just want to say, of course, they would never ask him to run they want him to, they would rather 4 more years of Trump than Bernie Sanders. We were talking earlier about how young voters get blamed every time there's low voter turnout in whatever election. Let's remember that Sanders got more votes of people under the age of 35 than both Trump and Hillary combined. So after how many years of saying, no, we're gonna do everything we can to thwart the candidate that you want, the candidate that builds a future for you, of course people are gonna be disillusioned. So I just wanna say that, like, we were talking about how age is not determinative, that you can call it a gerontocracy, but you really should call it a corporatocracy. And when someone like Sanders speaks outside of that, it's gonna captivate people. I do think it is sad that the progressive movement doesn't have anyone other than Sanders truly who is in a position to run. I also know that Ari Rabin-Haft, who wrote a book, who was Sanders' former campaign manager, I don't think he would be involved in this new run, but it's very fascinating, and thanks for the reporting, David.
Yeah, and Francesca, there's one other aspect to this, and that is a number of Democrats are looking at a much shorter runway in terms of a presidential campaign liftoff, because Joe Biden may wait until after the 2022 midterms. And typically, presidential campaigns, the donors, the infrastructure take 3 or 4 years to put together, and then the candidates formally declare for campaign finance disclosure reasons, right before the primaries or the summer before. So a number of Democratic donors and organizers are looking at, well, wait a second, if Joe Biden makes this runway much shorter for everybody else, who can raise a lot of money very quickly? And there seems to be an acknowledgement within the Sanders orbit that he's a guy who not only got more votes, he raised more money than any Democrat in the 2020 primaries. And there's a thinking among Bernie Sanders that movement is still intact for him, that it would be easier for him to fire up the movement, to raise the money, to be competitive in a shortened sort of presidential campaign than if, say, Joe Biden had said, a year ago that, hey, I'm only a one-term president, and let everybody else build up their organizations.
Yeah, last couple of things here, guys. First of all, get more details in David's video tomorrow at Rebel headquarters. Make sure you're checking that out. That part of the TYT network, obviously. And so now things are getting really interesting, because you got the big Democratic donors pushing the Gavin Newsoms of the world to run. Obviously, they got no interest in Bernie Sanders, but he's apparently at least checking the troops. And Francesca, I wouldn't necessarily say there aren't other progressives that could challenge. I think that there might be, so we'll have to see. But if there's gonna be other progressives, they're gonna have to run more aggressive than Bernie Sanders. And that would be the one big difference, right? Presumably, because the one Achilles heel for Bernie Sanders, of course, is that he's very loath to criticize other Democrats, and it has hurt him substantially in the last 2 primaries. And so that'll be an interesting dynamic. But all to say, the game's afoot, because everyone can see how weak Biden is. And when they likely lose these 22 elections, those whispers and now they're already getting louder, but they'll probably turn into screams after the elections. So we'll see how the elections go, but boy, things just got really interesting. Okay. All right, thank you, David. Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR, so those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.